So I'm really pleased to be here today at the Psychedelic Therapeutics and Drug Development Conference alongside some of the world's leading researchers and leaders in academia and industry to discuss the challenges and opportunities facing those engaged in the research and development of psychedelics for treating mental health disorders across the globe. And today on this panel, we will be discussing the evolving clinical trial paradigm, most pertinently around the growth of real-world evidence as an alternative option to randomized control trials. And so we welcome our panel today. We have two members of the core team at Albert Labs. We have Chief Medical Officer Malcolm Barratt-Johnson, I apologize, and also Chief Commercial Officer Graeme McFarlane. So if I could just ask maybe Graeme for a brief overview of Albert Labs, an introduction to your role there, and also a bit of background, some of your experience and expertise.
Sure. Thanks very much, Toby. It's a real pleasure being here. My name is Graeme. I am Chief Commercial Officer at Albert Labs, as Toby said. Albert Labs was formed in June of last year, solely for the purpose of bringing our version of psilocybin to the marketplace in a credible and clinically proven manner. You'll learn as we talk through this that we are actually targeting our efforts towards a particular patient cohort, which we'll come back to later. But as I say, Albert Labs, we are an expert and in many ways through our extraction methodologies, quite unique in our approach to bringing psilocybin through our formulation that we actually want to bring to market really quite soon. As I say, we live for that purpose, and my background and our behaviours, and Malcolm you'll hear from shortly, our behaviours are very much that of the pharmaceutical company or a biotech company, and my background is pharmaceutical. I started life in AstraZeneca and GlaxoSmithKline, and latterly Bristol Myers Squibb. I had my own company for a decade, which was acquired by IQVIA. So big research function there at IQVIA, within which I learned so much more about real world evidence and the value it brings. So that's my background, and that's why I'm here. And I'm very happy at this stage to hand over to Malcolm.
Thanks, Graeme. So I'm Malcolm Barratt-Johnson. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Albert Labs. As Graeme said, Albert Labs has been going just over a year now, and it's an amazing venture. We're taking psilocybin into an area where we haven't really used it before. So I'm very, very lucky to be working with the team. We have a wonderful team. We've got a wonderful advisory board helping us as well. My background is I'm a medical doctor. I've been a medical doctor for almost 30 years now, unfortunately. It goes so quickly. I trained as an anaesthetist and intensivist back in the late 90s. I went into the MHRA, the agency for the UK. I licensed a number of medicines there that went into pharmacovigilance and safety, and then transferred over to roles in both, like Graeme, AstraZeneca, and also Pfizer, and a number of other companies over the years too. I also headed up the MHRA's clinical trials unit back in 2005 when we first formed it, which was an amazing thing to be involved in. And like Graeme, I've run my own companies too over the years. So as I said, it's been a fascinating journey for me, and it's been absolutely amazing joining the Albert Labs team.
Amazing. So, well, we'll kick things off. And if we could just go straight into a sort of an explanation of what real world evidence studies include and how that's incorporated into Albert Labs' work and what you're doing at the moment.
So shall I kick that one off, Toby?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, real world evidence is just a way of looking at data for getting research out for licensing effectively, a number of other areas. It's not sort of fundamentally different to what we've been doing for hundreds of years. In fact, if you look at the way that medicines have been produced and used over the last centuries, real world evidence was the primary way of doing it. It was very empirical. You took patients, you saw what happened, and you used them or not. In the last 60, 80 years, I suppose what we've managed to develop is something called randomized controlled trials. These are trials, these are a way of looking at patients, the way of treatment, So you're basically judging one form of treatment against another one. And also you're judging it quite often against a control, like a placebo. So you've got a number of controls on there, you've got a number of randomizations which you put the patients into. So that's what an RCT is effectively. It's a way of judging one treatment therapy against another, using maybe standard of care or a control like a placebo, as I said. With real-world evidence, what you're doing is effectively looking at patients in the setting in which they're being treated normally. So it could be in terms of the clinic they're being being treated in normally, and you're then looking at the treatment you're giving in that setting and seeing what the treatment would do to them, both efficaciously wise and also safety wise. It allows a lot more flexibility. It also allows you to put patients into a trial setting far more rapidly and at a decreased cost. Another big advantage is that when you've got an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, you've got a very limited population. You may have 60, 100, or even 1,000 patients. It's difficult to actually judge what you're looking at in terms of the patient heterogeneity, because you've got a very limited genome sort of pool in which you're going to look at. Whereas if you've got a real-world evidence study, you've got a much wider group of patients, anybody who comes in, all comers effectively. That allows you a much wider range, and it allows you a much better understanding of safety as well going forward. Graeme, any other comments on that one?
Well, absolutely right. I mean, we've chosen this route. It's a credible route. It is a real-world evidence open by itself is actually growing, and I'm tempted to use the word popularity, but that kind of undermines the strength of real-world evidence. But it's all about providing really good evidence, good efficacy and safety, toe-to-toe with the clinician and the patient. And when we're dealing with the areas or the cohort, which I think we'll be talking about next, we need that sort of proximity with the patient. Some of this will be virtual, but the proximity will still be there, and some of the measures we use. So, there's observational real-world evidence where you actually gather data, and there is true on-the-ground clinical intervention where real-world evidence is used as big data to drive our understanding. So, that's why we've chosen it. Speed to market, credibility, and safety and efficacy proven.
And my understanding is that Albert Labs are focusing on cancer-related anxieties as a starting point. Can you tell me a little bit more about the patient cohort that you're looking to introduce to this real-world evidence study, and a bit more about the current medical treatments that are available treating mental health in the oncology space?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one to start. One thing that we've all agreed on when we started Albert Labs all those months ago was that we wanted to actually direct our efforts towards unmet need. So that's patients who are actually suboptimally treated and are actually suffering as a direct consequence of that, perhaps because of the illness, because of the cancer treatment, because you mentioned it's a cancer cohort, or perhaps because there are other things actually impacting on the psychological health of the patient involved. So we've chosen cancer because cancer in the UK, and I'm very aware this is all a bit UK-centric, but it's true of many countries in Europe as well. And again, we'll probably touch on things like Project Orbis that actually ties in numbers of countries together in respect of early access to medicine. Our early access to medicine focus is cancer, because cancer is a national agenda item, and it's one that gets a lot of attention. There's a lot of people suffering from cancer in the UK, right? We're talking about 3 million patients, if you like. 1.5 million patients then go on to suffer from, serious side effects. And mental health, even by itself, is also a national agenda item. On the current therapies, I'm not about to wade in to say that everything that's out there doesn't work. That's not even true. But studies are showing that, let's just give an example, SSRIs for the treatment of depression as a more generalized treatment is singularly successful. But when you've got other issues in cancer-related distress, by that I mean anxiety, depression, existential crisis, you've got so much more to deal with here. This isn't just satisfying a Hamilton rating scale. There's so many other things in terms of wellness, if you like, that we have to take heed of here. So, you know, we are very careful that we actually want to bring psilocybin to these patients, not have the side effect profile that currently exists with SSRIs, because we have evidence, we've seen it, it's all written up, it's out there in the public domain, where SSRIs don't work in a little over half of patients who are suffering from depression and anxiety. And those that do respond to a fair amount actually have quite poor side effects, and that does affect compliance. So that's why we're going there. We're going there because it is a recognised area that needs some intervention. It's an unmet need. It's a national agenda item, and there's patients at the end of this. This is something that we never forget at Albert Labs. We're not going, you know, blunderbuss across all depressions. We're going for a particular area that we feel actually needs some attention, and that's cancer-related distress. I don't know if you want to add anything, Malcolm.
Graeme, you've described it incredibly well. I think, you know, we've looked at the way that medicines have developed over the last 20, 30 years in this area in terms of anxiety, depression, things like that. We've had very few real breakthroughs. As Graeme said, you know, a lot of side effects occur with most of these substances, partly because we don't understand how a lot of them work very well. And we went in quite naively 20, 30 years ago. And that hasn't really developed much further. So as a new treatment, so having a new treatment in this area is an amazing thing to have. So I think we're very lucky to have this opportunity.
So, Graeme, you mentioned the opportunities for fulfilling this currently unmet need of patients. Is there a formal definition of a patient's unmet needs, or is there a criteria that patients need to meet to be considered available for alternate treatments?
Can I defer to Malcolm on this, because I think it's
sure, sorry.
a clinical response. Yeah. Thanks.
Unmet need is, as Graeme said before, very much of a subjective aspect in some respects. It's an area where the governments and clinicians really focus down and say, okay, we've got a group of patients here who have not been treated or not being treated adequately with what we got in the cupboard. So unmet need, to some extent, hasn't got a formal definition. But we all can see it when we go out there, when we treat patients. We know what groups of patients are not being treated adequately. Now, we're looking at oncology patients here, cancer patients for anxiety. Depression, anxiety is a very wide group of patients indeed. In fact, I think, unfortunately, with the pandemic going on, we've seen that day to day. My wife's a GP, and she sees anxiety probably the most common thing of anything that we have coming through the door. So unmet need is very much something which we know when we see it, and we know that cancer patients suffer more than anybody. It's also an area that really we haven't addressed. Cancer patients obviously are a group of patients who have to have their treatments for the cancer first and foremost. And that's fine, but we have really ignored everything that goes on around that. Partly because I think as well that cancer drugs themselves have got so many side effects, they've got so many interactions, especially in the last 30, 40 years. We've seen so many areas of chemotherapy where patients quite often die or they suffer very badly. And we haven't really thought, and we haven't really taken the nettle and said, okay, what else can we give them? We're too scared actually of affecting the efficacy of the cancer drug. We've got to a point in medicine and science now where we've got other therapies coming in. We've got things like immunotherapy. These have got a much better safety profile, generally speaking, with now time to actually go back and address the other issues these poor patients are suffering from. So it's an ideal situation to be in. So Toby, back to you, I think.
Yeah, and then back to you again, Malcolm. I think we're interested to know a bit more about how real-world evidence studies are being regarded by the regulators and whether it's actually changing their approach to licensing. And I think we're interested as well, obviously from the perspective of the UK, but also beyond, so the FDA and globally.
Yeah, real-world evidence is very much, as I said, an empirical thing that we've been using for centuries. It's the way the medicine's always been developed to some extent. But in terms of licensing as a cohort only came to being really in the late 60s, mid 60s, both here and in the States and globally. Now, as we said before, randomized controlled trials were very much the gold standard. It became the gold standard because it was a good way of doing it. The statistical basis under which products were developed and certified very much suited that way of thinking. Mm. Now, literally in the last 5-6 years, that's become understood to not be the best way. We don't catch everything. We don't catch the safety data as much as we could. And we've always veered more probably in the last 5 to 10 years and looking at the phase 4, which is post-marketing, to capture that safety data. We think, well, okay, we know roughly what's going on with the drug, but we don't know everything. But don't worry, we'll wait until we get out there and see what happens. It's okay, and that's been an acceptable way of working. But real-world evidence has really come to its fore literally in the last year. Why? Because we know with the pandemic, we've had to develop something called vaccines. And vaccines are a very complex way of working. We've managed to, amazingly, and I was at a conference yesterday where they were discussing how quickly we've got Pfizer, AstraZeneca coming up with these amazing vaccines, and most of them are very new science. So with a new science like we've had with these new sort of RNA vaccines, how can we do that so quickly? We've done it because of real-world evidence. We've had to inject these things into patients, and we've had to see what happens. We couldn't have waited around for 6 years and think, okay, we'll spend 2.1 billion on a new trial and then see what happens. We need to get these out. Now, that's done two things. First of all, it's given us an armamentarium, thank goodness, to try and depress the pandemic. But secondly, it's giving the agencies a way of looking at things they didn't really think of before, in terms of they developed new methodologies, they developed new ways of looking at licensing. Now, this has become very much focused on the UK, and as Graeme said, I'm sorry for it to be UK-centric, but we are doing a lot of stuff in this country. The other reason for the UK being central to this is because, fortunately or unfortunately, because of Brexit. It's allowed the regulator to stand back and think, okay, we can do things differently, the Europeans. So the European Medicines Agency, the EMEA, has been running the show for many, many years, and I've been very much part of that. But the MHRA is now allowed to go out, think, okay, is there another way of doing it? And this is what they've done. So real-world evidence and the data behind it, and licensing procedures accepting that data, have come of age. Now, also, what does this mean globally? And you ask that. Now, the FDA has also been working in the same areas we've done. To some extent, the commotions we saw about 4 or 5 months ago in the Europeans and in America to some extent, where they're thinking, I get it, but we're not going to license it, came because of this. The MHRA is pushing forward. And the Europeans didn't quite understand how the MHRA had done it so quickly. And the FDA, although they were much more forgiving, also didn't quite take that on board. They now have. So the FDA are now accepting the way the MHRA is driving stuff, and the Europeans, slightly begrudgingly, I hate it because I'm out in Italian, have also accepted it too. So I think it's a much more of a global process, and I think we may come on to that. But no, the licensing procedures have now caught up with science, thank goodness.
Well, I think it sounds really promising, both for patients and also Albert Labs. I think, Graeme, would you be able to just go into a bit more detail about the work that's going on at Albert Labs at the moment, and how progression will continue over the study and actually just over the next 6 to 12 months? Sure.
And I think the interesting thing to pick up on, and it was mentioned briefly by Malcolm, is that we've actually corralled, to our utter joy, a very, very skilled and very knowledgeable advisory board of the great and the good in psychology, clinical psychology, and oncology, palliative care. So the whole blend of people that we need to be talking to across the whole treatment paradigm have become advisors to us. So I won't name names here because it will be published on the website at some point once we have our first meeting. And we are our advisory board meeting. Very, very first one is actually in a couple of weeks' time, which is super. But the real world evidence study, for the moment, post the advisory board, will go through protocol development, which is what we've done already. And I say this to everyone when I talk about this is not aspirational. We've done it before, so it's actual, right? So we've done it on the medicinal cannabis side, and that's proven the template for us. Clearly, there's changes to that. It's a different disease area. but we have a methodology, we have an approach, we have, and we like to call it from a business point of view, an asset-light approach. That is, we do not have hordes of clinics and people sitting in clinics that we actually own. I'm never about owning buildings and chimney pots because they're expensive. But we have a great relationship, a network, reach into first-class centres in both oncology and psychology-assisted therapies, which is key to us. That's going to bring us speed to market. So advisory board, protocol development, getting sign-off with Malcolm's great help there with the MHRA, the scientific input that we require, going through the process. That's probably the lengthiest piece, yeah? So, you know, we're looking, you know, COVID-19 allowing, we're looking towards the end of the year to start seeing patient footfall through our trial setting, yeah? Now, if that slips a couple of months, so be it. But one of the questions that, you know, is always asked, and, you know, I'm happy to answer, is that because the process of real-world evidence, once we've got it all signed off, once we've got the key research centres up and running, is that we would probably start to publish results in the first 3 or 4 months, albeit just interim results, okay? Because we can actually start to see and start to examine data at that point to tell us what direction we're going in, because, you know, we want to start sharing this. And then probably within 6, 7, 8 months, we'll start to see the endpoints, resultant endpoints come to be over that period. So you can see this is really quite a fast turnaround when you compare. I know RCTs that have run for, you know, several years and have cost many hundreds of millions of dollars. You know, I'm pleased to say that we're not going down that route. That doesn't mean it's the wrong route. It's just not our route. And we hope to get this published out there, start setting some templates, if you like, for use in the clinical setting through, you know, the patient pathways that exist and that sort of stuff. That's going to take longer. You know, I'm not naive. It'll take longer, but there will be habits, if I'm allowed to use that term, set in clinical practice that we'll see actually expand out into other areas. So, you know, speed to market, good, robust trials, tried and tested in a different disease area already with cannabis. So, you know, we're really hopeful we'll get results early. And yes, we will publish all the time because we want the world to see it. Yeah, so it's exciting times.
Yes, lots to look out for over the coming months then from Albert Labs. And just sorry, we only have about 5 minutes left, so I'll push a bit more on your reasoning and your justification for focusing on the UK market. I mean, you mentioned the scale of the issue with cancer patients in the UK in terms of their mental health, and also some of the national agenda items. Are there any other advantages to focusing on the UK and starting in the UK?
Well, apart from it being a great place to work for Toby, I think as Graeme said, you know, they're national issues in the UK. They're also issues in every other country. We can't kid ourselves on that one. You know, mental health is a big issue globally, and cancer is a huge issue for everybody in the world. But I think, you know, we have amazing centres in the UK. We're going to some of the top centres. As Graeme said, we got amazing advisory boards. We got some of the very best researchers in the world in the UK. And the other thing is that we have also the backing of government. The UK government is very focused on research. It wants the UK to be the leaders in research in the world, if it possibly can do. It's got a lot more keen on that actually post-Brexit. You know, again, we were having a conversation with the Secretary of State the other day, and he very much focused on this, and he said, look, for goodness sake, we're trying to give you everything we can. We know you've done a great job with the pandemic. The AstraZeneca drug, there's a few questions about it sometimes, but it's done an amazing job here, and it's a UK-based company with a UK-based product. We've learned a lot from that, as I said, and the licensing authority has been given not quite carte blanche, but it's given a lot of freedom to take forward these medicines, these new advances. And so we've got a great product, we've got great advisors, we've got a great clinical team, great centres, a great regulatory agency, and a government who's supportive of us. So I think of any country in the world, I think this would be the country to come to. Graeme, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, you've said it all, but I mean, you know, if I can use the term fit for purpose, you know, the UK, or UK PLC, let's call it, right, is truly fit for purpose. You know, we've got all the magical centres that Malcolm talked about, all the great experience that we actually have in the UK, which is superb. But also there is a change in mindsets post-Brexit and as a result of COVID-19, where we're seeing decisions being made for reasons of innovation. So, you know, when you've got NICE and when you've got MHRA, which is a regulatory body, working together for the first time, and Malcolm knows this because he was there 20 years ago, they were talking about this, working more closely and getting joined up processes. This is the first time in the last 2 months, 3 months, that actually that's a reality now. You know, they're actually dealing with big data and they're actually dealing together and they're producing innovative processes to allow us early access to medicines that says post-trial, you can actually go for your license a hell of a lot quicker rather than waiting another 2 years. So, you know, I use that term fit for purpose and I use it educatively that, you know, this is a good place to be as a market.
Brilliant. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time. No doubt it's a conversation that will continue to flow. And I imagine anyone who's enjoyed this panel would be able to find out more information on the Albert Labs website or the social media channels. But yeah, so thank you, Malcolm, and thank you, Graeme, for your time today. It's really appreciated and it was a really interesting conversation. So thank you again.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you, guys.